Now, pull up a chair, folks, because this isn't just a story about clothes and fancy showrooms. This is a story about family, betrayal, and the kind of money that can make people do truly terrible things. We're talking about the Avery family and the fashion empire they built called Avery and Thorn. Don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. What city are you listening to this story from? Write to us in the comments. Now let's continue. If you've ever walked down Fifth Avenue and seen a storefront so grand it looked like it was carved out of pure moonlight, that was probably an Avery and Thorn. It was a brand that whispered old money but shouted global power. And at the very top of that empire sat two sisters, Olivia and Charlotte. Their father, Richard Avery, he was the genius. He built the brand from a single tailoring shop in Connecticut into a multi-billion-dollar behemoth. When he died 5 years ago, suddenly, over the Christmas holidays, he left the whole kit and caboodle to his two daughters, split right down the middle, 50-50. Now, 50-50 sounds fair, right? A true partnership. But in the world of billion-dollar corporations, 50-50 is just a recipe for a Cold War. You see, Richard had hoped they would balance each other out. Olivia, she was the fire. She was sharp, aggressive, and obsessed with the bottom line. She handled the ready-to-wear, the e-commerce, the fast fashion that brought in the bulk of the cash. She lived in spreadsheets and saw everything in terms of market share and digital presence. Her office, high up in Midtown Manhattan, was all glass and sharp angles, reflecting the city's relentless energy. Charlotte, on the other hand, was the soul of the company. She ran the haute couture division, the archives, the legacy pieces. She cared about the history, the artistry, the things that made Avery and Thorn, not just another label. Her office was softer, filled with vintage mannequins and bolts of silk, smelling faintly of old leather and fine perfume. She was tradition, Olivia was the future. For 5 years, they managed this uneasy truce. They sat on the same board, they shared the same last name, but they operated in completely separate orbits, occasionally colliding like rival galaxies. They smiled for the cameras at Fashion Week, looking like the perfect, polished siblings, but behind those smiles, they were constantly measuring each other up. Olivia always believed she was the one truly carrying the weight. Charlotte is just babysitting expensive cloth, she'd sneer to her chief financial officer, Mitch. I'm the one fighting the war against the fast fashion giants. And Charlotte? She watched Olivia's relentless expansion with suspicion. She saw her sister chasing trends and cutting corners, worrying that Olivia would dilute the very essence of the brand just to satisfy Wall Street's hunger for growth. The tension had been building like steam in a sealed kettle, and this morning, folks, the whistle was about to blow. It was a Tuesday, the day before the crucial quarterly board meeting. Olivia was pacing her massive office. The view of Central Park below looked insignificant compared to the storm brewing inside her. She wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the kind that screamed, "I am in charge," and her expression was set in a mask of determined confidence. She had been working toward this day for 18 months. You see, Richard Avery hadn't left all the shares to his daughters. There were small percentages scattered among various trusts and family members, a cousin in Connecticut, an old family friend who sat on the board, a foundation their mother had started. None of them held enough power to matter individually, but together, they were leverage. Olivia had been quietly, ruthlessly, buying them out. She hired a team of lawyers and financial ghosts who specialized in this kind of quiet acquisition. They had been working under the radar, using shell corporations and private equity funds to scoop up those loose shares. Last night, the final transfer had cleared. Olivia now held 51.5% of Avery and Thorn. She didn't need Charlotte anymore. In fact, she realized Charlotte was just a costly obstacle. Olivia picked up the phone and pressed the internal line for Charlotte's assistant. "Tell Charlotte I need to see her. Now, bring coffee, black, and close the door behind her." The message was curt, a command, not a request. Charlotte was down 2 floors, meeting with her head designer about the new Paris collection. She hated being summoned like an intern, but she knew that tone. When Olivia used that tone, it meant trouble, big trouble. Charlotte arrived a few minutes later, gliding into the glass tower like a queen entering a hostile court. She was dressed in one of her own designs, a deep sapphire dress that was classic and elegant. Where Olivia was all sharp edges, Charlotte was flowing lines. "Olivia," Charlotte said, her voice cool, pulling up one of the sleek leather chairs without waiting for an invitation. "I'm rather busy. Is this about the Q3 projections? Because I already sent Mitch the revised numbers for the couture line." Olivia didn't even look up from the document she was pretending to read, a thick binder stamped confidential. "It's not about Q3, Charlotte," Olivia finally said, closing the binder with a sharp slap that echoed in the silent office. She looked up, and the look in her eyes was pure ice. "It's about the future of this company. My company." Charlotte felt a sudden, cold knot tighten in her stomach. That phrasing, my asterisk company, was deliberate. "Avery and Thorne belongs to both of us." "Olivia," Charlotte corrected, her tone utterly steady, though her heart was starting to pound against her ribs. Olivia allowed herself a small, cruel smile. "Does it? That's what we're here to discuss, isn't it?" She reached into the binder and pulled out a single, neatly folded document. It wasn't a financial report. It was a legal document, thick with signatures and notary seals. "I've spent the last year and a half correcting Father's biggest mistake," Olivia began, leaning forward, resting her elbows on the polished desk. "Splitting the control of a global brand between two people who fundamentally disagree on strategy is unsustainable. It leads to stagnation. It leads to soft leadership. And frankly, Charlotte, it leads to you spending millions on historical archives when that money should be invested in our supply chain automation." Charlotte bristled. "The archives are the foundation of the brand. They are why we can command those prices, Olivia. You treat this like it's a cheap electronics company. I treat it like a business that needs to grow, not a museum that needs saving." Olivia shot back, her voice rising slightly. She pushed the document across the desk. "Read it." Charlotte unfolded the paper slowly. The header was clear: "Notice of intent to acquire controlling interest and mandatory buyout offer." She scanned the legalese, but the bottom line hit her like a punch to the gut. The percentages, the finalized transactions, the names of the minority shareholders she recognized, Cousin David's Trust, the old Thorne Family Foundation, they had all sold out. To Olivia. "You've been buying shares," Charlotte whispered, the realization hitting her like a wave of nausea. "Not buying, Charlotte. Consolidating. I now hold 51.5% of Avery and Thorne stock. Effective immediately, I have the controlling interest." Olivia settled back in her chair, the victor surveying the battlefield. "I can dissolve the co-CEO structure. I can force a vote to restructure the board. I can, quite simply, remove you." Charlotte dropped the paper as if it burned her fingers. Her mind was racing. How could she have been so blind? She had been focused on the designs, the collections, the integrity of the legacy, while Olivia had been playing the high-stakes financial game, silent and deadly. "You used family money to launch a hostile takeover against your own sister," Charlotte said, her voice dangerously low. "Against me. It's not hostile, Charlotte. It's necessary. And it's business," Olivia countered, keeping her voice level and devoid of emotion. "Look, I'm not throwing you out entirely. I'm offering you a graceful exit. This document," she tapped the buyout offer, "is a generous offer for your remaining 48.5%. You walk away with roughly $5 billion. You can buy all the museums and archives you want. You can start your own small label focused on artistry, but you will no longer have control over Avery and Thorne. $5 billion. An incomprehensible amount of money. Enough to retire 10 times over and live like royalty." But it wasn't about the money for Charlotte. It was about the name. It was about her father's legacy. It was about the promise she felt she owed to the brand's heritage. "You think this is what Father wanted?" Charlotte challenged, her eyes blazing. Olivia scoffed. "Father wanted the company to thrive. And under your sentimental leadership, we were lagging. We were becoming irrelevant. I am taking the reins to secure the future. You are a distraction. I am the reason we still have a soul, Olivia. You're turning this into a commodity. A commodity that prints money." "Yes," Olivia agreed coolly. "Now, here's the timeline. I need your response by 5 p.m. today. Accept the buyout, and we issue a joint press release tomorrow morning announcing your amicable departure to pursue personal ventures. You get a golden parachute and the respect of the industry." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "If you fight me," Olivia continued, her voice hardening, "I will force the vote tomorrow at the board meeting. I have the votes. It will be ugly. You will be publicly humiliated, and the stock will tank. The headlines will read, Avery's sister ousted in bitter power struggle. You will lose your position, and you will lose leverage on the sale price. Your golden parachute will look more like a damp napkin. It was a perfect corporate trap. Olivia had cornered her, using the very structure their father had designed to protect them both. Charlotte took a deep breath, trying to steady the earthquake happening inside her chest. 5 years of grudges, slights, and simmering resentment had finally erupted into open warfare. She stood up slowly, pushing the chair back neatly. She didn't look defeated. She looked dangerous. You've been planning this for a long time, haven't you? Charlotte asked, her voice now completely devoid of emotion, making it all the more chilling. I plan everything, Charlotte. That's the difference between us. Charlotte walked over to the window, looking out over the concrete jungle that Olivia loved so much. The city seemed to swallow up everything below, just as Olivia intended to swallow up her life's work. She turned back to her sister. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She just delivered a promise that hung in the air like poison. You think you've won, Olivia. You think because you own a few extra percentage points, you control everything. But you forgot one thing. And what is that, Charlotte? Olivia challenged, a bored look on her face. I know this company better than anyone. I know where the bodies are buried. And I know how to fight dirty, Charlotte stated, her eyes locking onto Olivia's. You want a war? You just declared one. But unlike you, I won't be trying to buy the company. I'll be trying to burn it down before you can take it. Olivia laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Empty threats, Charlotte. You're all about preserving the legacy. You won't risk the brand. Watch me, Charlotte said simply. She didn't touch the coffee. She didn't touch the buyout offer. She just walked out, leaving the cold, sterile silence of Olivia's office behind her. As the door clicked shut, Olivia leaned back, feeling a rush of exhilaration. She had won. Charlotte was emotional, predictable, and had just confirmed she would try to fight, which meant she would inevitably stumble. Olivia already had her lawyers prepared for the legal battle. It would be messy, but brief. By the end of the month, she would be the sole CEO of Avery and Thorne. She didn't realize that Charlotte's threat wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a strategic declaration. Charlotte didn't go back to her own office. She walked straight out of the building, ignoring her assistant's frantic calls. She needed air. She needed quiet. And she needed to think fast. She hailed a cab and gave an address in the financial district, a place far removed from the glitz of the fashion world. She was heading to see Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the only son of the Thorne half of the original partnership, a quiet man who managed a massive, multi-generational family trust. He was a financial wizard, known for his cold logic and his ability to see 5 moves ahead. He was the only person Charlotte trusted who understood both corporate law and the internal workings of Avery and Thorne. When she arrived at his austere office, Marcus was waiting for her, looking grave. He already knew. In the world of high finance, a major shift in stock control never stayed secret for long. Olivia called me this morning, Marcus confirmed, gesturing for her to sit down. She wanted to confirm my proxy vote for tomorrow's board meeting. And what did you tell her? Charlotte asked, leaning forward, desperate. I told her that the Thorne Trust always votes with the majority shareholder, Marcus said flatly. Charlotte, she has you. Legally, ethically, she followed the rules of the corporate charter to the letter. She played the game better than you did. Charlotte slumped in her chair. She wants me out by the end of the day. She offered a buyout. A massive one. Take it, Marcus advised immediately. Seriously, $5 billion is a historical payout. You can't win this fight, Charlotte. Not head-on. I can't let her destroy everything, Marcus. She'll turn Avery and Thorne into a discount factory within 5 years. She has no respect for the craft. Charlotte rubbed her temples. There has to be another way. A way to stop her from taking over the company without destroying my own stake. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. Short of finding some kind of catastrophic failure in her division, no? You need leverage that isn't financial. Catastrophic failure, Charlotte repeated, the words echoing in the silence. Olivia's division, the ready-to-wear and e-commerce, was a machine. It was fast, efficient, and generated mountains of cash. But fast efficiency often meant cutting corners. And cutting corners, even slightly, in a billion-dollar operation, could leave huge, gaping holes. Charlotte knew how Olivia operated. She trusted her own team implicitly, but she didn't scrutinize the deeper, more complex financial structures set up by Olivia's CFO, Mitch. Mitch was a snake, obsessed with tax avoidance and aggressive accounting. What if her division isn't as clean as she thinks it is? Charlotte murmured, thinking aloud. She pushed everything so hard for growth. She set up dozens of new international subsidiaries last year alone. Marcus leaned forward, his expression changing from resigned to cautious interest. International subsidiaries are where the trouble always starts, Charlotte. Layered accounting, opaque reporting, it's how companies hide things. She's been pushing the boundaries on cost capitalization for the new digital infrastructure, Charlotte recalled. Mitch was bragging about how they were minimizing taxes by shifting assets overseas. Tax avoidance is legal. Tax evasion is not, Marcus reminded her. And if you find evidence of illicit financial activity, even minor fraud, in a publicly traded company of this size, it triggers something much bigger than a simple boardroom disagreement. Charlotte's eyes widened. She understood what he was implying. This wasn't about winning back 1.5% of the shares. This was about triggering a nuclear option. The SEC, Charlotte breathed out. The Securities and Exchange Commission. Marcus nodded gravely. If there is any credible evidence of financial misconduct, misrepresentation of earnings, or misuse of corporate funds, especially if it involves international transfers or inflated revenues, the SEC will launch an investigation. And when the SEC investigates a major company like Avery and Thorne, they don't just ask questions. They freeze assets, they seize records, and they bring the entire operation to a standstill. If the SEC launches an investigation into Olivia's division, the stock will plummet, Charlotte calculated quickly. The board will panic. Her controlling interest becomes worthless overnight because the entire brand is facing ruin. Marcus didn't confirm or deny it, but his silence was confirmation enough. It's a scorched earth tactic, Charlotte. It will hurt you just as much as it hurts her. The family name will be dragged through the mud. The company could be crippled for years, maybe even dissolved. But she won't be able to force a buyout or take control, Charlotte insisted, a fierce determination hardening her face. The company will be in regulatory lockdown. She wins nothing. And you risk everything, Marcus countered. You need proof, Charlotte. Absolute, undeniable proof of embezzlement or systemic fraud. You can't just plant an anonymous tip. You need a smoking gun that points directly at the financial activities under Olivia's command. Charlotte thought back to the last few years, the aggressive spending, the way Mitch always seemed to be running complex maneuvers to make Olivia's numbers look better than they were. I might know where to look, Charlotte said slowly, a plan forming in her mind, cold and precise. Mitch set up a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands last year, supposedly for intellectual property management. But I always thought it was too complicated for what it claimed to do. That's a good starting point, Marcus agreed. But you can't go in there yourself. You need someone on the inside. Someone Olivia trusts implicitly, but who reports to you. Charlotte smiled, a thin, sharp line that matched the cold calculation in her eyes. Olivia is careful, but she's also arrogant. She's so focused on the big picture that she delegates the dirty work to people she believes are loyal. But loyalty is expensive, Marcus. And I know exactly who isn't deep enough with Olivia's accounts to get me what I need. Who? Her executive assistant, Charlotte replied. A young man named Julian. He handles all the personal expenses, the travel, the petty cash for the ready-to-wear division, and more importantly, he has access to Mitch's encrypted drives. Julian is ambitious, but he's also drowning in student debt, and I know he hates Mitch. Charlotte stood up, the desperation gone, replaced by a chilling clarity. Olivia had played the game of finance and power, but Charlotte was now going to play the game of sabotage and survival. I need access to Olivia's division records, Marcus. Not the quarterly reports she shows the board, but the real, raw data. I need to find the evidence that proves she or Mitch crossed the line from aggressive accounting to criminal activity. And if you find nothing, then I take the $5 billion and walk away, knowing I tried to save the brand. Charlotte lied smoothly. She knew she wouldn't walk away. If she found nothing, she'd create something. I can arrange for a secure forensic accountant to meet with your contact, Marcus said. But Charlotte, be warned. Once you go down this road, there is no turning back. If you fabricate evidence, and it's discovered, you won't just lose the company. You'll go to prison. Charlotte met his gaze, unflinching. Olivia Avery just tried to erase me from my own family's history. I'm not worried about prison, Marcus. I'm worried about living in a world where she wins. She left Marcus's office with a new mission. She had less than 24 hours until the board meeting. She had to move fast, quietly, and decisively. That evening, while Olivia was celebrating her victory privately with her lawyers, Charlotte was meeting Julian in a dark, anonymous bar in Brooklyn. Julian was pale, nervous, and clutching a briefcase. "Ms. Avery, I don't know about this," Julian whispered, clutching the strap of the bag. "If Olivia finds out I gave you this." "She won't," Charlotte assured him, sliding an envelope across the table. It wasn't $5 billion, but it was enough to clear his debts and set him up comfortably for a year. "This is a down payment, Julian. You're helping me save the brand from mismanagement. You are doing the right thing." Julian opened the envelope, saw the number, and swallowed hard. "What is in the briefcase?" Charlotte asked. "It's everything. Mitch's internal accounting logs for the last 9 months, the files on the Cayman subsidiary, and the private expense reports for the ready-to-wear marketing budget. It's all encrypted, but the password is taped to the inside cover." Charlotte took the briefcase, her hands steady. This was it. Her weapon. "Go home, Julian. Don't call me. Don't call anyone. Just act normal. And when the chaos starts tomorrow, you'll be safe." Charlotte left the bar and went straight to a secure, unmarked location where Marcus's forensic accountant was waiting. For the next 8 hours, they worked in silence, sifting through hundreds of thousands of files, looking for the needle in the haystack, the definitive proof of financial misconduct that would bring the SEC crashing down on Olivia's carefully constructed empire. The accountant, a grim-faced woman named Eleanor, was methodical and fast. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The air was thick with tension and the glow of computer screens. "Anything?" Charlotte finally asked, her voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Eleanor didn't look up. "There's a lot of aggressive depreciation here, Ms. Avery. Everything is being pushed to the edge of legality, but I'm not seeing a clear criminal intent yet." Charlotte felt a wave of despair wash over her. It was too clean. Olivia had covered her tracks too well. "Keep looking at the international transfers," Charlotte urged. "Focus on the subsidiary in the Caymans, Avery Digital Assets." Eleanor clicked and scrolled, her brow furrowed. "Wait a minute. This doesn't look right. They claimed this subsidiary was for IP management and software licensing, but the outgoing payments are huge. And they aren't going to software vendors. Where are they going?" Eleanor adjusted her glasses, zooming in on a series of wire transfers that had been labeled ambiguously. "They are going to a private vendor in Panama, listed as consulting services. A lot of money, Ms. Avery. Over $20 million in the last 6 months. Who is the recipient?" "The recipient is listed under a blind trust," Eleanor said, shaking her head. "But the routing numbers. I recognize this bank. It's a small private institution in Geneva." Charlotte leaned closer, her heart hammering. "Can you trace the beneficial owner of the trust?" "It's difficult," Eleanor admitted. "But look at the dates and amounts. These payments are cyclical. They correspond exactly to the end of each quarter, right before the revenue reports are finalized." "Ghost Consulting," Charlotte murmured, realizing the scheme. "They are shifting massive amounts of cash out of the company, disguising it as an operational expense, effectively lowering their taxable income and inflating the apparent profitability of the ready-to-wear division by making the expenses disappear." "Exactly," Eleanor confirmed, her voice grim. "It's a classic shell game. But here is the real kicker, Ms. Avery. I found a corresponding internal memo, hidden deep within a travel folder. It's from Mitch to Olivia, outlining the Q4 strategy for asset disbursement. It's highly coded, but the figures match the outgoing transfers." Eleanor pulled up the memo. It was a single paragraph, but it confirmed everything. It detailed the necessity of managing the excess capital flow to ensure the division met its aggressive profit targets, and it explicitly mentioned the Geneva account. "This is it," Charlotte whispered, staring at the screen. "This is outright embezzlement and financial misrepresentation. This isn't just aggressive accounting. This is fraud." Eleanor nodded. "This memo, combined with the bank records, if we can confirm the beneficial owner of that trust, is enough to trigger a full SEC investigation." It suggests systemic fraud designed to mislead shareholders and the board. And who controls the trust in Geneva? Charlotte demanded. Eleanor was typing furiously, running the routing number through a specialized database. She paused, her eyes widening slightly. Ms. Avery, she said slowly, looking up at Charlotte. The beneficial owner of the trust, it's not Mitch's name. It's not even a shell corporation. The account holder is listed as O. Avery Private Investments, LLC. Charlotte stared at the screen, a cold, hard satisfaction settling deep in her bones. Olivia hadn't just approved the fraud. She was the one directly benefiting from the stolen funds. The millions they were hiding as consulting fees were being diverted straight into Olivia's private investment account. Olivia wasn't just attempting a takeover. She was funding it with the very money she was stealing from Avery and Thorne. Charlotte felt a surge of adrenaline, replacing the exhaustion. She had the smoking gun. It was 4 a.m. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. Eleanor, Charlotte commanded, pulling out her phone. Package all of this. Print everything. We need 3 copies. 1 for me, 1 for Marcus, and 1 delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office, first thing this morning. Anonymously, you are going to report this to the SEC? Eleanor asked, stunned by the scale of the decision. No, Charlotte said, a chilling smile touching her lips. I am going to let Olivia walk into the board meeting tomorrow, confident in her 51.5%, and then I am going to expose her in front of every single member. And then, I will let the SEC finish the job. Charlotte was no longer fighting for her job or her ownership percentage. She was fighting for survival, and she was going to use the law and her sister's own greed as her weapon. The war had officially begun, and Charlotte was ready to retaliate with a force that would threaten to tear the entire billion-dollar brand apart. The moment the sun rose over Manhattan, Charlotte was back in her office, dressed impeccably, holding a briefcase that contained not just the truth, but the total annihilation of her sister's career and possibly her freedom. She looked out the window, not at the city, but at the glass tower where Olivia sat, waiting for her victory. You wanted a fight, Olivia? Charlotte thought, her hand tightening around the briefcase handle. You got one. The sun was just a pale wash of light over the skyscrapers when Charlotte stepped out of the unmarked building. She wasn't tired. She was operating on a dangerous combination of adrenaline and righteous fury. The briefcase felt heavy, weighted not by paper, but by the fate of a multi-billion-dollar empire. She had spent the last hour coordinating with Eleanor, the forensic accountant. The evidence, the coded memo from Mitch, the wire transfer records, and the damning confirmation that the money was flowing directly into O. Avery Private Investments, LLC, was now packaged, verified, and sealed. This is going to be messy, Ms. Avery, Eleanor had warned, her face grim even after 8 hours of work. This isn't just internal theft. This is fraud aimed at manipulating the market. The fallout will be total. The alternative is letting Olivia dismantle the brand piece by piece, Charlotte had replied, her voice firm. We choose the fire we want to fight. Before heading back to Midtown, Charlotte made one crucial stop. She met Marcus Thorne in a small, discreet coffee shop near Grand Central. Marcus, looking impeccably tailored despite the early hour, listened intently as Charlotte laid out the summary, not showing him the documents, but stating the facts. $20 million, Geneva Trust, Mitch, and Olivia's private LLC. Marcus didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed with profound concern. You found evidence of criminal fraud, Charlotte. Not just aggressive accounting. This is serious federal territory. It is, Charlotte confirmed, sipping her black coffee. Olivia has been cooking the books to artificially inflate the performance of the ready-to-wear division, stealing from the shareholders, and then using that money to buy out those same shareholders. It's a closed, greedy loop. And your plan? I am going to let her start the meeting. I am going to let her declare her controlling interest. And then I am going to expose her in front of the entire board, Charlotte stated, her voice calm, utterly unlike the emotional sister Olivia expected. I need you, Marcus, to ensure that when I drop this bomb, the board immediately votes to suspend Olivia and launch an internal investigation before she can legally block it. Marcus leaned back, considering the risk. If the board is smart, they'll want to control the narrative before the SEC gets involved. Your evidence is strong enough to force a suspension. But Charlotte, The moment this hits, the stock will crater. Avery and Thorne will lose billions in valuation before lunch. It's the price of survival, Charlotte said simply. If I don't stop her now, the company dies slowly under her greed. If I do this, we get a chance to rebuild the integrity. We save the name. Marcus nodded slowly. I will prepare the motion for immediate suspension and the formation of an independent ethics committee. We will need absolute silence from now until 9 a.m. Charlotte left the coffee shop feeling a grim certainty. She had done everything she could to prepare for the corporate fight. Now, she was entering the war zone. The Avery and Thorne headquarters felt charged that morning, thick with unspoken anticipation. Everyone knew this was the day the Cold War between the sisters would finally end. But they all assumed Olivia, with her 51.5% stake, was the guaranteed victor. Olivia arrived exactly at 8:50 a.m., sweeping through the marble lobby with her CFO, Mitch, trailing closely behind. She was radiant in a power suit, her face alight with the thrill of victory. She greeted the few board members she passed with a confident smile, accepting their tacit congratulations. Mitch, however, was a nervous wreck. He had spent the night reviewing the numbers, convinced that the complex structures they had built were impenetrable. But the thought of Charlotte's unpredictable anger made his stomach churn. He didn't know what she knew, but he knew enough to fear her retaliation. The board meeting was held in the grand, wood-paneled conference room on the 45th floor, a room designed to feel permanent and solid, overlooking the volatile city below. At 9 a.m. sharp, the doors were closed. 11 people sat around the massive mahogany table: Olivia, Charlotte, 5 independent directors, including Marcus Thorne, 2 old family friends, and Mitch, the CFO. Olivia sat at the head of the table, tapping a pen lightly against the buyout offer she planned to formally present to Charlotte. "Good morning, everyone," Olivia began, her voice crisp and professional. "We have a brief agenda today, but a crucial one for the future direction of Avery and Thorne. Before we get into the quarterly reports, I need to address the structural changes." She launched into a practiced, smooth speech about the necessity of singular leadership and strategic cohesion in the face of global competition. She talked about growth, modernization, and the need to streamline operations. All coded language for Charlotte is slowing us down. "As you know," Olivia continued, her eyes sweeping the room, pausing briefly on Charlotte, who sat perfectly still, radiating an unnatural calm. "I have spent the last 18 months consolidating the minority shares to ensure clear strategic alignment. I am pleased to announce that, as of yesterday, I hold a controlling interest in the company, 51.5%. A low murmur went around the table. The family-friend directors looked disappointed, but the independent directors simply nodded. It was corporate reality. "Therefore," Olivia stated, picking up the buyout document, "I am exercising my right as majority shareholder to restructure the executive leadership. Effective immediately, I will be dissolving the co-CEO structure. I will be proposing a vote to appoint myself as the sole CEO and chairwoman of the board." She glanced at Charlotte, expecting defiance, perhaps tears, certainly an immediate protest. "Charlotte," Olivia said, her tone softening with false pity, "I have presented you with a generous offer to purchase your remaining shares. I urge you to consider the stability of the company and accept the buyout. We can announce your amicable departure tomorrow, ensuring a smooth transition for the market." The air in the room was thick with expectation. Everyone waited for Charlotte to explode, or perhaps to capitulate. Charlotte simply smiled. It wasn't the polite, polished smile she used for cameras. It was the sharp, unsettling smile of a predator who had just spotted a fatal weakness. "Thank you, Olivia," Charlotte said, her voice cutting through the silence, clear and steady. "I appreciate the offer. But before we vote on dissolving the co-CEO structure, I think we should address the financial stability of the division you currently manage." Olivia frowned, annoyed by the delay. "Charlotte, the Q3 reports for ready-to-wear were outstanding. Mitch can confirm we exceeded growth targets by 12%. Mitch nodded frantically, trying to look reassuring. "Absolutely, stellar performance, all verified." "Indeed," Charlotte agreed, reaching down and placing her briefcase on the table. "Stellar performance. But I have some concerns about how that performance was achieved." She opened the briefcase, pulling out a thick binder. She didn't hand it out. She just held it. For the last year, Olivia's division has been moving significant amounts of capital out of the company, disguising it as consulting fees paid to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Avery Digital Assets, Charlotte stated, looking directly at the independent directors. The room went silent, but the silence was fractured by a sharp, involuntary sound from Mitch, the CFO, who suddenly looked like he might faint. Olivia laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. Charlotte, this is ridiculous. We use standard IP management structures for tax efficiency. You're confusing tax avoidance with something nefarious. I am not confused, Olivia, Charlotte countered, her eyes never leaving her sister's. Tax avoidance is legal. Embezzlement is not. I have documentation showing that over $20 million in corporate funds has been systematically diverted out of Avery and Thorne and transferred to a private trust account in Geneva. She paused, letting the word embezzlement hang in the air like a cloud of poison. Mitch, Charlotte said, turning her attention to the sweating CFO. Perhaps you can explain the cyclical payments to the blind trust, specifically why they align perfectly with the revenue reporting deadlines? Mitch stammered, grabbing a glass of water with a shaking hand. Those were critical strategic consulting fees, Ms. Avery. Highly sensitive contracts that must remain confidential. Confidential? Yes, Charlotte agreed sweetly. So confidential that the beneficial owner of the Geneva Trust is listed under O. Avery Private Investments, LLC. The reaction was immediate and explosive. What? Demanded one of the independent directors, Mr. Sterling, slamming his fist on the table. Olivia's face, moments before flushed with victory, went completely white. She looked at Mitch, a look of pure, murderous rage in her eyes. Mitch shrank back, realizing he was about to be thrown under a very large, fast-moving bus. That is a lie, Charlotte. You fabricated this. Olivia yelled, finally losing her composure, her voice echoing in the sudden silence. Did I? Charlotte asked calmly, pulling out the memo Eleanor had found. She didn't read the whole thing, just the key sentence. This memo, signed by Mitch and approved by you, Olivia, outlines the Q4 strategy for asset disbursement and explicitly references the Geneva account, noting the necessity of managing the excess capital flow to ensure profit targets are met. Charlotte laid the memo in the center of the table. This is not a strategic difference, directors. This is systemic fraud. Olivia wasn't just trying to acquire the company. She was funding her takeover with money stolen from the company itself. Money that should have been reported as profit, but was instead disguised as operational expense to inflate her division's apparent efficiency, misleading shareholders. Marcus Thorne seized the moment. He stood up, his face grave. Directors, regardless of the veracity of these claims, and the documentation presented appears highly credible. The mere suggestion of embezzlement and financial misrepresentation involving the principal CEO and CFO requires immediate action. This is a direct threat to our fiduciary responsibility. He looked at Olivia, who was struggling to formulate a coherent denial. I move that we immediately suspend Olivia Avery from her duties as co-CEO and chairwoman, and Mitch Harris from his position as CFO, pending an emergency, independent forensic audit, Marcus declared. Furthermore, I move that we form an emergency ethics and oversight committee comprised of the 3 independent directors to handle this crisis. The motion was seconded instantly by Mr. Sterling. Olivia found her voice high-pitched and frantic. You cannot do this. I have the majority. I own 51.5% of this company. Your shares are irrelevant if the company is found to have committed federal felonies. Olivia, Marcus said coldly. Your controlling interest gives you the right to run the company, not the right to run it into the ground via fraud. This is not a shareholder vote. This is a vote to protect the shareholders from you. The vote was called. The 5 independent directors, Marcus, and the 2 family friends who were horrified by the scandal, all raised their hands. 8 votes against Olivia and Mitch. Charlotte, who still held her 48.5%, didn't need to vote. She had won the boardroom battle without casting a single vote in her favor. The motion passes, Marcus announced, looking directly at Olivia. You are suspended, effective immediately. Mr. Harris, you are suspended. Security will be escorting you both out of the building, and all corporate access will be revoked. The immediate aftermath was pure pandemonium. Olivia, stripped of her corporate power, initially refused to leave the room. She screamed at Charlotte, accusing her of fabricating evidence, of treason, of trying to destroy their father's legacy. "You think you're saving the brand? You just signed its death warrant." Olivia shrieked, her tailored suit suddenly looking like a costume. "When the SEC sees this chaos, they will tear us apart." "I already sent the evidence to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Olivia," Charlotte informed her calmly, standing between her sister and the door. "They are already aware. You won't be able to sweep this under the rug." That sentence broke Olivia. She sagged, the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing, hitting her with the force of a physical blow. She didn't fight the security guards who arrived moments later to escort her and a sobbing Mitch out of the building. By 9:30 a.m., the news was beginning to leak. Avery and Thorne boardroom coup. Co-CEO suspended amidst fraud allegations. The headlines were sensational, feeding the ravenous appetite of the financial press. Marcus Thorne took over as interim CEO, working with the newly formed Oversight Committee. Their first priority was containing the damage. "Charlotte," Marcus said, pulling her aside into a smaller office, his face tight with stress. "You were right. The evidence is undeniable. But the market is reacting violently." He pointed to a Bloomberg terminal flashing red. Avery and Thorne stock, AVT, had plummeted 25% in the first hour of trading. Billions of dollars had been wiped out. "This is just the start," Marcus warned. "The SEC is going to launch a full-scale investigation. They will be here this afternoon. They will want every file, every server, every email related to the ready-to-wear division. They will freeze assets. They will interview everyone." "I understand," Charlotte replied. She felt no triumph, only a deep, cold exhaustion. She had achieved her goal. Olivia was neutralized, and the company was saved from her immediate control. But the price was astronomical. "You need to prepare, Charlotte," Marcus continued. "Even though you exposed the fraud, the SEC will treat you as an insider. They will scrutinize your division, too, looking for any sign of complicity or knowledge." "My division is clean," Charlotte asserted confidently. "We run a lean, ethical operation." "I hope so," Marcus said, looking skeptical. "Because they are going to look for any reason to bring down the whole structure. When the SEC comes for a company this size, they don't look for one criminal. They look for a toxic culture." The afternoon was a blur of crisis management. Lawyers swarmed the 45th floor. Phones rang incessantly. The PR team issued a carefully worded statement confirming the suspension of Olivia Avery and Mitch Harris due to serious allegations of financial impropriety, assuring the market that the board was cooperating fully with authorities. At 3 p.m., the hammer fell. A convoy of unmarked black cars arrived at the Avery and Thorne headquarters. Agents from the SEC's Enforcement Division, along with several U.S. Marshals, swept into the ready-to-wear division offices. They executed search warrants, sealing off entire sections of the floor. Computers were seized, servers were taken offline, and employees were ordered not to leave or speak to anyone. The relentless, efficient machine of Olivia's division ground to a terrifying halt. Charlotte watched the chaos from her window, realizing the terrifying magnitude of what she had unleashed. This wasn't a corporate spat anymore. This was a federal investigation that threatened the very foundation of the family name. Later that evening, Marcus called an emergency meeting with Charlotte and the 3 independent directors. "The SEC is not playing around," Marcus reported, looking defeated. "They have issued a formal inquiry regarding accounting practices and potential misrepresentation of earnings. They are demanding full access to all financial records across all divisions, not just ready-to-wear." "Why my division?" Charlotte demanded. The evidence was isolated to Olivia's operations. "Because the SEC doesn't trust anyone now, Charlotte," Marcus explained, running a hand over his tired face. "They see 2 sisters at war, one accusing the other of massive fraud. They assume the entire company is compromised. Until we can prove otherwise, they will treat Avery and Thorne as a crime scene." He sighed deeply. "They have frozen the corporate accounts related to the ready-to-wear division, pending review. They have also issued subpoenas for the personal financial records of both you and Olivia and every major executive, including Mitch." Charlotte sat back, absorbing the implications. The brand was paralyzed. The investigation was not focused on Olivia anymore. It was focused on Avery and Thorne. We need to cooperate fully, Charlotte insisted. We need to show them that my division, Couture and Legacy, is the clean heart of the company. We need to isolate the corruption. We will try, Marcus agreed. But the SEC is relentless. They will look for any discrepancy, any irregularity, no matter how small, to build a case for systemic failure. The following morning, the front pages were a disaster. Avery and Thorne, once a symbol of prestige and stability, was now synonymous with scandal. The stock market had suspended trading of AVT shares temporarily, a move that signaled deep trouble. Charlotte, now effectively running the company under the oversight of the Emergency Committee, felt the pressure closing in. She spent the entire day fielding calls from terrified designers, suppliers, and retail partners. The supply chain was starting to fray, and the global reputation was in tatters. Late that afternoon, Charlotte's executive assistant, a woman named Vanessa, rushed into Charlotte's office, looking pale. Ms. Avery, the SEC agents are here. They are demanding access to the Couture Division's server archives. They say they have reason to believe related financial documentation might be stored here. Charlotte felt a sudden, icy fear grip her heart. Related documentation? Her records were pristine. She ran a small, tightly controlled budget focused on artistry, not aggressive growth. Cooperate fully, Vanessa, Charlotte instructed, trying to sound calm. Give them everything they ask for. The agents spent hours in Charlotte's division, their presence a silent, terrifying accusation. They were cold, professional, and efficient. Around 6 p.m., one of the lead agents, a woman named Agent Davis, approached Charlotte's office. Ms. Avery, Agent Davis said, her voice flat. We found something in your division's archived expense reports that we need you to explain. Charlotte swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. What is it? We are looking at the marketing budget for the Spring 2023 Paris collection, Agent Davis explained, holding up a printout. Specifically, a series of invoices totaling nearly $800,000 for fabric and materials sourcing from a vendor called Silk Road Textiles Incorporated in New Jersey. Charlotte frowned. Yes, that's standard. We use high-end, specialized silk and lace for the runway pieces. That vendor is legitimate. The vendor is legitimate, Ms. Avery, Agent Davis agreed. But the invoices are highly irregular. They were processed by your office, stamped as paid, and filed in the archives. However, there is no corresponding outflow of funds from the Avery and Thorne operating accounts to Silk Road Textiles Incorporated. The funds for those invoices appear to have been diverted into a private account. Charlotte stared at the printout, her mind reeling. Diverted funds? In her division? Impossible. She ran a transparent budget. That's impossible, Charlotte insisted, rising from her chair. Every invoice is cross-checked. My team is meticulous. The money would have gone to the vendor. The money did not go to the vendor, Ms. Avery. Agent Davis corrected her, her expression unreadable. Silk Road Textiles Incorporated confirmed they never received payment for these specific invoices. The payment routing was altered just before processing, and the recipient account for the $800,000 diversion is an account held by Julian Vance. Julian Vance, Olivia's former executive assistant. The young man Charlotte had paid to get the records that exposed Olivia. A cold wave of realization washed over Charlotte. The envelope she had given Julian the night before was a down payment, enough to clear his debts. But $800,000? That wasn't a down payment. That was a corporate crime. Julian Vance was Olivia's assistant, Charlotte stammered, feeling a sudden, desperate need to protect herself. This must be related to her fraud. He must have used the Couture Division's systems to move money for her. We are investigating Julian Vance as well, Agent Davis said, her eyes boring into Charlotte. But the funds were routed through your division's internal accounting system, under the authority of a digital signature linked to your personal login, Ms. Avery. Furthermore, we found physical copies of these fraudulent invoices, the ones marked paid, filed in a binder labeled Q3 Couture Expenses in your locked filing cabinet. Charlotte felt the floor tilt beneath her. She hadn't put those invoices there. She hadn't authorized the payment. I didn't do this, Charlotte whispered, the certainty in her voice cracking. Someone planted this. Someone is trying to frame me. Agent Davis simply nodded, the lack of accusation in her voice making the situation far more terrifying. That is possible, Ms. Avery. But right now, the evidence suggests that while you were exposing your sister for embezzling $20 million from the ready-to-wear division, you were simultaneously diverting $800,000 from the couture division through a complex scheme that utilized your personal access codes and was subsequently filed neatly in your own office. We will need you to come downtown with us, Ms. Avery, Agent Davis concluded, her voice softening slightly, but the authority remaining absolute. We have a lot of questions about the integrity of your own division's financials. Charlotte stared at the wall, seeing not the elegant wallpaper, but the image of Olivia's cold, triumphant smile from the day before. I know how to fight dirty, Charlotte had warned her. But Olivia had been fighting dirtier still. Olivia hadn't just been stealing money. She had been preparing a contingency plan, a trap, using the very person Charlotte trusted to bring her down. Julian, the ambitious, indebted assistant, hadn't just sold out Olivia's secrets. He had sold out Charlotte's security, allowing Olivia or Mitch to plant the perfect, devastating evidence. Charlotte realized, with a sickening lurch in her stomach, that her scorched earth retaliation had provided Olivia with the perfect opportunity. By exposing Olivia, Charlotte had triggered the SEC investigation, bringing the regulatory body right to her own doorstep. And there, waiting for the agents, was the perfectly planted evidence of embezzlement, designed to implicate Charlotte, destroy her credibility, and ensure that if Olivia went down, Charlotte would go down with her, taking the entire, fragile legacy of Avery and Thorne with them. The SEC investigation, meant to save the company, was now threatening to dismantle Charlotte's division, her reputation, and her freedom. The Cold War was over, but the full-scale, mutually assured destruction had just begun. The elevator ride down from the 45th floor was the longest of Charlotte's life. She wasn't in handcuffs. Agent Davis and the marshal made sure to keep the process discreet, maintaining a veneer of professional courtesy, but the feeling of being escorted out of her own building, her future dissolving with every descending floor, was far worse than any physical restraint. You understand this is voluntary, Ms. Avery, Agent Davis stated as they reached the garage level, where a plain sedan waited. But we strongly advise cooperation. The quicker we understand the financial pathways, the quicker we can contain the damage. Charlotte didn't argue. She knew the rules of this game had changed entirely. She wasn't a co-CEO fighting a hostile takeover anymore. She was a suspect in a federal fraud investigation. She spent the next 4 hours in a small, windowless interrogation room downtown, the air thick with stale coffee and unspoken accusations. Agent Davis and another agent, named Miller, laid out the evidence with surgical precision. They had the digital trail, Charlotte's personal login used to initiate the payment routing change for the $800,000 invoice. They had the physical evidence, the stamped, paid invoices for Silk Road Textiles Incorporated, found in her own locked filing cabinet. And they had the motive. Julian Vance, the recipient of the funds, was the same man Charlotte had just met with privately to exchange cash for corporate secrets. We see a pattern here, Ms. Avery, Agent Davis stated, leaning across the table. Your sister, Olivia, was allegedly skimming millions from the ready-to-wear division. And you, it appears, were running a smaller, parallel scheme in the couture division, using inflated vendor invoices to funnel money to your operative. He is not my operative, Charlotte insisted, her voice tight with controlled desperation. I met with Julian Vance once, last night, to obtain records proving Olivia's fraud. I paid him a small sum to help me save the company. The $800,000 you were talking about, that's a setup. Olivia planted that evidence. Agent Miller scoffed, scribbling notes. A convenient narrative, Ms. Avery. You claim your sister, who was facing suspension, somehow predicted you would stage a hostile exposure, and in the few hours before that happened, managed to hack your system, change the payment routing, transfer nearly $1 million, print the fraudulent invoices, and place them perfectly in your locked office. Yes. Charlotte bit back. She is meticulous. She knew I was suspicious of her division. She set up a contingency plan. Julian Vance was her mole, not mine. He sold her out. Then he sold me out, giving her access to plant the evidence. And why, Ms. Avery, would you meet with a known mole and pay him cash? knowing he had access to sensitive corporate data if you weren't involved in illicit activity? Agent Davis countered smoothly. The optics are damning. You expose a crime, only to be found with a smaller, equally egregious crime literally filed under your nose. Charlotte had no defense for the optics. She had been so focused on the massive scale of Olivia's embezzlement that she had entirely dismissed the possibility of a smaller, perfectly targeted trap. She had used Julian, and Olivia had used Julian better. It took Marcus Thorne, arriving with a high-powered defense attorney, nearly 6 hours to secure Charlotte's release. She wasn't formally charged, but she was released under strict conditions. She could not return to the Avery and Thorne headquarters without permission. She had to surrender her passport, and she was considered a material witness and a person of interest in the ongoing investigation. The next morning, Charlotte was holed up in Marcus Thorne's private townhouse, far from the chaos of Midtown. She sat across from Marcus and the attorney he had retained, a formidable, sharp-tongued woman named Diane Sterling, no relation to the board member, who specialized in white-collar criminal defense. "The situation is catastrophic, Charlotte," Diane began, setting down a stack of legal papers. "The SEC is treating Avery and Thorne like Enron. They have seized all primary servers. They are interviewing every single person involved in the ready-to-wear division, and they are now focused on the integrity of the couture division's financials, thanks to the $800,000 ghost payment." "It was planted, Diane," Charlotte insisted, her voice raw. "I believe you, but the jury won't," Diane said bluntly. "The evidence is physically present in your office, linked to your access key, and the beneficiary is the man you paid cash to. It looks like you were running an internal slush fund, and when your sister tried to take over, you blew the whistle on her massive fraud to distract from your own small one." Marcus rubbed his temples. "The market is reacting exactly as Olivia predicted. The stock is still suspended. Trading won't resume until the company can demonstrate financial stability, which won't happen until the SEC investigation is concluded. Our lenders are calling in lines of credit. We are hemorrhaging cash." "And where is Olivia?" Charlotte demanded. "Did she get arrested?" "No," Diane replied. "She was interrogated, but she's out. She and Mitch are pointing fingers at each other, and both are claiming that while aggressive accounting was used, the specific money transfer to the Geneva Trust was a misguided, unauthorized maneuver by Mitch, who then panicked and falsified documents to cover his tracks. She's trying to pin the $20 million on Mitch." "Exactly. And Mitch, to save his own skin, is now subtly confirming that he helped Olivia plant the $800,000 in your division as insurance, claiming he suspected you were also running improper books." Diane sighed. "They are turning this into a she said legal nightmare, where both COSOS appear equally compromised, poisoning the entire well." The genius of Olivia's trap was now terrifyingly clear. By having Mitch plant the small, undeniable crime in Charlotte's area, Olivia ensured that Charlotte's exposure of the major crime would be viewed not as a heroic act of corporate governance, but as a desperate move by a rival criminal. "I need to find Julian Vance," Charlotte stated, standing up abruptly. "He is the key. He knows who gave him the access codes to my system and who told him where to file the invoices." "We've already tried," Marcus said grimly. "Julian Vance is gone. His apartment is empty, his phone is disconnected. He's vanished, likely bought off and hidden by Olivia or Mitch." Charlotte felt a cold spike of despair. Julian was the only living witness who could definitively confirm the planting of the evidence. "If we can prove the $800,000 was planted after the board meeting, or that Julian was working for Olivia to frame me, we might be able to shift the narrative," Diane advised. "But right now, the federal government sees 2 dishonest sisters and 1 massive, failing corporation. So, what happens to Avery and Thorne?" Charlotte asked, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus stared out the window at the gray Manhattan sky. "The board, led by the ethics committee, is trying to stabilize things, but without access to the ready-to-wear funds, we can't pay our major vendors. If we default on those payments, the supply chain breaks. We are looking at potential bankruptcy within 60 days if the SEC doesn't release the financial holds." Charlotte clenched her fists. She had gone to war to save the company, and in doing so, had created the crisis that might destroy it completely. "We have to fight the planting of the evidence, Diane," Charlotte insisted. I need to find the flaw in their trap. Olivia is brilliant, but arrogant. She wouldn't have left the details to chance. The only detail that matters is the digital signature on the payment authorization, Diane replied. It's linked to your login. Unless we can prove someone else used your computer or your password, that's going to be impossible to dispute. For the next week, the city was obsessed with the fall of the Avery dynasty. Every news outlet ran features comparing the two sisters, the aggressive thief, Olivia, versus the artistic embezzler, Charlotte. The legacy their father built was reduced to tabloid fodder. Charlotte was confined to the townhouse, working remotely with Marcus and the legal team, trying desperately to help the Ethics Committee navigate the SEC's demands. She felt utterly powerless, watching her life's work disintegrate from a distance. One afternoon, while reviewing the financial files Eleanor had originally pulled from Julian's briefcase, the files that exposed Olivia, Charlotte noticed a small detail she had overlooked in the chaos. "Diane, look at this," Charlotte called out, pointing to a tiny discrepancy in the CFO Mitch's internal accounting logs. "When Julian gave me the files, he gave me everything Mitch had been working on, including his personal log of encrypted transactions." Diane leaned over, looking at the screen. "Mitch was working on two things simultaneously on the evening before the board meeting," Charlotte explained. "The first was the final transfer of funds to the Geneva Trust, Olivia's $20 million. The second was the creation of a new, unique user profile on the Couture division's internal payment system." "A new profile?" "Yes. He created a temporary, ghost profile named AVT Q3 Auditor. He deleted it immediately after using it, but the creation logs are still here in Mitch's own archive data." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "Why would he create a ghost auditor profile?" "Because he needed a way to access my division's payment system, alter the routing, and approve the fraudulent invoice without using his own login or Olivia's," Charlotte theorized. "If he used his credentials, it would tie the planting directly to Olivia's division. But if he used my login, it points directly to me." "He could have just used your login if Julian gave him the password," Diane pointed out. "He could have, but that's sloppy," Charlotte countered. "Olivia doesn't do sloppy. If he used my actual login, any subsequent forensic audit would show my computer accessing the system at the exact moment the fraud occurred. If he used a ghost profile, he could route the payment change, use Julian to file the physical paperwork, and then delete the profile, leaving only the result tied to my division." "But the SEC said the digital signature was tied to your personal login, Charlotte." "That's the brilliance of the trap," Charlotte explained, running a hand through her hair. "Julian gave Mitch my password. Mitch created the ghost profile, accessed the payment system, initiated the fraudulent transfer, and then digitally signed the authorization using my login credentials while operating under the ghost profile. When the SEC pulls the audit trail, it shows the change came from the Couture system, authorized by my credentials, but they missed the immediate deletion of the temporary user. If they could prove the temporary auditor profile existed and that Mitch created it, they could argue that the entire transaction was a setup, executed by Olivia's team using stolen credentials. "We need to bring this to the SEC immediately," Diane said, grabbing the keyboard. "Wait," Charlotte stopped her. "We can't just tell them Mitch left a digital breadcrumb. The SEC is already biased against us. We need to find the physical proof that Mitch or Olivia gave Julian the order to file the fraudulent invoices in my office." Charlotte knew that while Olivia was ruthless, she was also obsessed with control. There had to be an instruction, an email, or a coded message confirming the planting of the evidence. They spent the rest of the day diving back into the hundreds of thousands of files Julian had provided. They weren't looking for Olivia's fraud anymore. They were looking for Mitch's communication regarding the $800,000 trap. Finally, late that night, Charlotte found it. It wasn't an email. It was an encrypted text exchange between Mitch and an anonymous burner number, dated the day before the board meeting. * Mitch, package confirmed. Ready for delivery. * burner, location secure. Ensure placement is exact. Use the Q3 marker. * Mitch, confirmed. The target will confirm receipt tomorrow. * The Q3 marker, Charlotte whispered, recognizing the reference. "That's the binder in my locked cabinet. Q3 Couture expenses. And the target will confirm receipt. That's Julian." He was told to make sure the physical evidence was placed in the most secure location in my office. But who was the burner number? Diane asked. Charlotte stared at the screen, a cold certainty settling in her gut. It's Olivia. Mitch wouldn't communicate with anyone else so cryptically about a crucial, high-risk operation like framing a co-CEO. The discovery provided a powerful counter-narrative. Mitch created a ghost user, stole Charlotte's credentials, executed the fraud, and then, under Olivia's instruction, used Julian to physically plant the evidence in her locked office. Diane immediately presented this new evidence to the SEC, highlighting the ghost profile creation and the coded text exchange. The SEC, already dealing with the overwhelming task of investigating the $20 million fraud, reluctantly agreed to refocus some resources on the possibility of obstruction and tampering of evidence. The pressure on Olivia intensified. She was formally barred from communicating with any Avery and Thorne employee and was facing mounting legal bills. Her defense was crumbling under the weight of Mitch's erratic statements and the undeniable evidence of the Geneva Trust. But the SEC investigation into the $800,000 fraud still hung over Charlotte. While the evidence of planting was compelling, the SEC needed to resolve the original crime. They needed to find Julian Vance. 1 week later, the situation at Avery and Thorne reached critical mass. The suspension of trading was extended indefinitely. Creditors were circling. Marcus Thorne and the Ethics Committee were openly discussing the possibility of a formal Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing to protect the remaining assets from the inevitable lawsuits. Charlotte knew that if the brand went into bankruptcy, the name Avery and Thorne would be forever tarnished, and her father's legacy would be dissolved in a fire sale. She had to act faster than the lawyers and the regulators. She realized that Olivia's arrogance was her only remaining weakness. Olivia wouldn't have let Julian Vance simply disappear. She would have kept him close, controlled, perhaps even hidden in plain sight, ensuring he couldn't flip and testify against her. Charlotte needed to think like her sister. Where would Olivia hide a valuable, high-risk asset like a witness? Not in a cheap hideout. That was too risky. Olivia would put him somewhere expensive, secure, and utterly bland. Charlotte called Eleanor, the forensic accountant who had helped her originally. Eleanor, you helped trace the Geneva accounts. Can you look at Olivia's personal expenditures since the board meeting? Not the corporate funds, but her private money. Look for any new, long-term luxury rentals. Eleanor, working remotely under a cloud of secrecy, got back to Charlotte within 2 hours. I found a large, non-refundable deposit for a corporate rental paid by Avery Private Investments LLC, Eleanor reported. It's a luxury apartment in a high-security building in Miami, Florida. 3-month lease, paid in full. Miami. Secure. Anonymous. Run Julian Vance's name against flight manifests and rental car records in the Miami area for the days following the board meeting, Charlotte commanded. The confirmation came back quickly. A man matching Julian Vance's description had checked into the Miami rental property 3 days after the board meeting, using a prepaid debit card that was activated in New York the morning of the board meeting. Olivia hadn't just paid Julian off. She had paid for his silence and his hideout. Charlotte didn't tell Marcus or Diane. She knew the moment she involved them, the SEC would be notified and Olivia would be alerted. This had to be a personal, surgical strike. She needed to get to Julian before Olivia or her lawyers could coach him further. That evening, using a commercial flight and a borrowed identity, Charlotte flew to Miami. The luxury high-rise in South Beach was everything Olivia valued. Cold marble, tight security, and absolute discretion. Charlotte, dressed in anonymous vacation wear and dark sunglasses, managed to slip past the lobby security, claiming to be a friend visiting a tenant. She located the apartment number Eleanor had provided. It was on the 30th floor, overlooking the ocean. Charlotte knocked, her heart pounding. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Finally, the door opened a crack, secured by a chain. Julian Vance looked terrible. He was unshaven, pale, and looked like he hadn't slept in days. Julian, Charlotte said softly, keeping her voice low. It's Charlotte Avery. I know you're working for Olivia, and I know why you planted those invoices in my office. Julian tried to slam the door, but Charlotte wedged her foot in the gap. Don't do this, Julian. You are not safe here. Olivia paid you to disappear, But she won't protect you when the SEC starts pressing charges for the $800,000 fraud. They think I did it, but they know you received the money. Julian peered out, his eyes darting nervously. I don't know what you're talking about. I was paid for consulting work. You paid me yourself. I paid you a down payment. Olivia paid you $800,000 in stolen corporate funds, money that came directly out of my division's budget and was routed to your account. And guess what, Julian? Olivia is currently trying to pin the $20 million fraud on Mitch, and Mitch is trying to pin the $800,000 on you and me. Julian's bravado vanished. He knew the legal maneuverings. You're the weakest link, Julian, Charlotte pressed. You took the money, and you filed the paperwork. You are the only person who can confirm that the ghost invoices were planted under instruction from Olivia and Mitch, using stolen credentials. If you don't talk to me now, the SEC will find you, and you will be facing federal conspiracy charges, not just for the $800,000, but possibly for the entire $20 million scheme as well. Julian slowly unlatched the chain and opened the door, pulling Charlotte inside. She promised me immunity, he whispered, his hands trembling. She said if I disappeared, her lawyers would handle everything. Her lawyers handle her, Charlotte corrected him sharply. She is fighting for her freedom, Julian. You are collateral damage. I know you were the one who gave Mitch my login details and placed the physical binder in my cabinet. Tell me everything. Julian, terrified and cornered, finally broke. He confirmed that Mitch had approached him 2 weeks before the board meeting. Mitch, under Olivia's explicit direction, had offered Julian a massive sum to act as an internal mole. His job was twofold. First, to siphon off all encrypted data related to Mitch's own activities, so Olivia could later use it to frame Mitch if necessary. And second, to facilitate the planting of the trap in Charlotte's office. Mitch gave me a flash drive containing the altered invoices and told me to file them in your locked cabinet, Ms. Avery. Julian confessed, pacing the room frantically. He said he needed to make sure the records were secured by the co-CEO before the audit. He also gave me your login and password, which I had written down previously when I helped you with a software update a few months ago. He told me to give it to him so he could test the security protocols. And the $800,000? That was my payment for the entire operation, the files I gave you, the planted evidence, and disappearing to Miami. It was wired to my account the morning of the board meeting, right before you called me. The pieces clicked into place. Olivia had used Julian to get the dirt on Mitch, used Julian to set the trap for Charlotte, and then used Julian's payment as the final, damning evidence against Charlotte. Julian, you need to come back to New York with me, Charlotte said, her voice firm, taking control. You are going to testify to the SEC that you planted the evidence under Mitch and Olivia's instruction. It's the only way you survive this, and the only way I clear my name. Julian looked out the window at the distant, glittering ocean, his short-lived dream of freedom. He knew she was right. If he stayed, he was a sitting duck for federal prosecution. If he talked, he might get immunity. I'll do it, Julian agreed, defeated. But I need protection. If Olivia knows I'm talking, she'll ruin me. Olivia is currently under intense scrutiny, and she cannot leave New York, Charlotte assured him, though she was lying. Olivia was still dangerous. We are going to fly back tonight. You will go straight into protective custody, and you will give your testimony to the SEC. 2 days later, the news hit Manhattan like a seismic shock. Julian Vance, the key witness in the Avery and Thorne scandal, had surfaced and was giving a full, sworn deposition to the SEC, detailing the scheme to plant evidence in Charlotte Avery's division. The SEC, already convinced of Olivia's massive fraud, immediately issued a warrant for Mitch Harris's arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and tampering with evidence. They also officially elevated Olivia Avery's status from witness to primary suspect in the $20 million embezzlement case, adding charges of conspiracy to obstruct justice. Charlotte, now legally cleared of the $800,000 fraud, was restored to her position as co-CEO. But the title felt meaningless. She walked back into the Avery and Thorne headquarters for the first time in 2 weeks. The 45th floor was eerily quiet. The ready-to-wear division was still sealed off, a ghost town of empty desks and seized servers. Marcus Thorne met her in her office, looking exhausted but relieved. The board is issuing a statement confirming your exoneration and condemning Olivia and Mitch, Marcus said. handing her a press release draft. Julian's testimony was devastating. It proved the planting, and it showed the depth of Olivia's planning. She thought of everything. She did, Charlotte agreed, sinking into her chair. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to annihilate me. The good news is that the SEC is now focused entirely on Olivia and Mitch, Marcus continued. The bad news is that the investigation into the company's overall financial health will continue for months, if not years. And the brand is on life support. The stock remained suspended. Suppliers were still demanding payment. The global reputation was in ruins. We need a miracle, Charlotte. The board is meeting tomorrow to discuss Chapter 11. We have no liquid assets, and our name is toxic. Charlotte looked around her office. The soft silks, the vintage sketches, the essence of the legacy she had fought so hard to protect. She had won the battle against Olivia, but in doing so, she had lost the war for the company's stability. I won't let it go into bankruptcy, Marcus, Charlotte said, rising from her desk. Avery and Thorne is still worth something. It's worth the legacy. It's worth the artistry. What do you propose? Charlotte walked to the window, looking out over the city that had witnessed their spectacular collapse. Olivia and Mitch stole $20 million from the company, Charlotte stated. But Olivia herself is still sitting on billions in personal assets. Assets she tried to use to buy me out. Assets she controls through Avery Private Investments, LLC. Marcus stared at her, realizing where she was going. You can't. Those are her personal funds. They are separate from the corporation. Not entirely, Charlotte countered, a steely glint in her eyes. She funded her hostile takeover by stealing corporate funds. The SEC will be fighting for restitution from her private accounts to cover the $20 million. But I know another way to pressure her. How? Olivia thinks she's protected by her legal team and her fortress of personal wealth, Charlotte said. She doesn't realize that the greatest threat to her isn't the SEC investigation. It's the family legacy. It's father's name. Charlotte picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in years, the number of the family's longtime publicist, a woman who specialized in reputation management for old money families. This is Charlotte Avery, she said into the phone, her voice cold and commanding. I need you to prepare a statement. A very personal statement. I want every news outlet in the country to know that the surviving co-CEO, Charlotte Avery, is personally suing Olivia Avery for criminal breach of fiduciary duty, corporate theft, and irreparable damage to our father's name. Charlotte, a civil suit right now will only make the situation messier, Marcus warned. It will force her hand, Marcus, Charlotte insisted. We can't wait for the slow wheels of the SEC to turn. I want her assets frozen by a civil court before her lawyers can hide them further. And I want the world to know that Avery and Thorne is fighting back, not just as a corporation, but as a family reclaiming its honor. Charlotte hung up the phone, her resolve hardened. She had cleared her name, but the company was still sinking. Now, she was going to use the one thing Olivia truly cared about, her flawless image and her massive personal wealth, to force her to pay for the damage she had inflicted. The war had moved from the boardroom and the SEC office to the civil court and the court of public opinion. Charlotte was going to make Olivia pay for the cost of survival. But as the crisis deepened, Charlotte realized that the SEC investigation might still hold one final, devastating surprise. A secret hidden not in Olivia's records, but perhaps much closer to home. The destruction was mutual, and the cost was still rising. The phone call Charlotte made to the family's longtime publicist, Eleanor Vance, no relation to Julian. Thank goodness. The world of high finance loves to reuse names. Was the sound of the final, desperate gambit. I need the public to understand that Avery and Thorne, the brand, is the victim here, Charlotte instructed, her voice tight with exhaustion and fury. And that I, as the remaining co-CEO, am the only one fighting to recover the stolen assets. The next day, the headlines shifted again. While the SEC investigation was slow, methodical, and opaque, Charlotte's civil suit was swift, public, and personal. Asterisk, Avery's sister sues sister. Charlotte Avery seeks $5 billion in damages and restitution from embezzling sibling Olivia. Asterisk. The civil suit was a corporate and emotional grenade. It wasn't just about the $20 million in proven corporate theft. It was a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty, gross negligence, and, most powerfully, for the destruction of the Avery family name and brand valuation. Charlotte's lawyers immediately filed motions to freeze all of Olivia's personal assets derived from Avery and Thorne stock sales or dividends, arguing that those funds were tainted by the underlying corporate fraud. Olivia, now operating out of a heavily guarded penthouse and communicating only through her battery of lawyers, was furious. She couldn't publicly fight the SEC without incriminating herself, but the civil suit was a direct, humiliating attack on her wealth and reputation. She's trying to punish you, not recover funds. Olivia's lead defense attorney, a sleek, aggressive man named Mr. Harrington, told the press. This is a vindictive action taken by a sister who lost a corporate power struggle. But Charlotte had the moral high ground, thanks to Julian Vance's testimony. She was the one who exposed the crime, and she was the one trying to stabilize the sinking ship. We are fighting to ensure the thousands of employees who depend on Avery and Thorne do not pay the price for one individual's greed, Charlotte stated in a controlled press conference, looking directly into the cameras. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, the uniform of mourning and determination. The civil court reacted faster than the federal government. Within 72 hours of the filing, a judge granted a temporary injunction, freezing billions of dollars of Olivia's assets, pending the outcome of the lawsuit. It was a massive, unprecedented victory for Charlotte, and a crippling blow to Olivia. "This is it, Charlotte," Marcus Thorne told her, looking slightly less stressed. He was still acting as interim CEO, navigating the SEC's constant demands. "The freezing of Olivia's assets gives us tremendous leverage. We can use this to negotiate a rapid restitution of the $20 million she stole, plus penalties, which might inject just enough liquidity to keep us out of Chapter 11 for another few weeks." The immediate threat of bankruptcy had receded slightly, but the company was still bleeding. Production was stalled, suppliers were nervous, and the stock remained suspended. The SEC investigation was the ultimate sword of Damocles, hanging over every decision. "The SEC is still here, Charlotte," Marcus warned. "They are done with the he said, she said between you and Olivia. Now, they are looking at the company itself. They are treating the $20 million fraud not as an isolated incident, but as a symptom of deeper, systemic failure." The SEC agents had moved their focus from the volatile e-commerce division to the stable, historical archives of Avery and Thorne. They were looking for structural rot. Charlotte found this absurd. The couture division was the soul of the company, slow, expensive, and meticulously documented. "They are asking for records going back 25 years, Marcus reported one afternoon, running a hand over his tired face. "Specifically, they are interested in the period between 1998 and 2005, the years when Richard Avery took the company public and orchestrated the massive global expansion." Charlotte felt a familiar knot of unease tighten in her stomach. That was the golden age, the time she remembered her father as an untouchable genius, the man who built the empire. "What are they looking for?" Charlotte asked. "They are focused on the initial funding structure for the international subsidiaries that Richard established in Europe and Asia during that rapid expansion phase," Marcus explained. "Specifically, they are looking at the initial capital investment into a holding company in Luxembourg called Avery Global Partners." Charlotte remembered that name vaguely. It was a complex structure set up long ago for tax purposes, meant to manage the company's burgeoning intellectual property and licensing deals overseas. "It was father's structure," Charlotte said, feeling defensive. "It was aggressive but legal. He had the best corporate lawyers in the world." "Perhaps," Marcus said, his eyes troubled. But the SEC found a discrepancy in the initial capital reporting for Avery Global Partners. The reported investment, about $150 million, doesn't seem to match the actual cash flow documented at the time. They believe the initial capital investment might have been overstated to impress early institutional investors. Overstating capital during an IPO or major expansion was serious. It was a form of financial misrepresentation designed to inflate the company's perceived value and attract higher investment. "That would be 20 years ago, Marcus," Charlotte whispered. "Is there a statute of limitations? For civil fraud, maybe. For criminal conspiracy, perhaps not. If they can prove a continued cover-up," Marcus replied. "But the real danger isn't the legal action against a dead man. The danger is what this does to the company now. If the foundation of Avery and Thorne's global structure, Avery Global Partners, was built on financial misrepresentation, the SEC could argue the company's entire current valuation is fraudulent. The thought sent a chill down Charlotte's spine. Olivia's fraud was a cancer. Her father's potential fraud was a rotten foundation. Charlotte spent the next few days in the archives, a place she usually found comforting, now filled with dread. She wasn't looking at elegant sketches or vintage fabrics. She was sifting through dusty, yellowed binders containing the original incorporation documents for Avery Global Partners. She found the name of the external consultant who handled the creation of the Luxembourg entity, a financial architect named Elias Vance, another Vance. Elias Vance had been a notoriously aggressive, slightly shady consultant in the late 90s, famous for creating opaque offshore structures. Charlotte pulled the file on Elias Vance. He had severed ties with Avery and Thorne abruptly in 2006, just after the global expansion was completed. Hidden deep within a personnel file, Charlotte found a handwritten note from her father, Richard Avery, to his then CFO, dated November 2005. Asterisk, Elias has become a liability. Ensure all records related to the AGP funding are securely archived and inaccessible. We cannot risk exposure. Sever all ties immediately. Keep the retainer active until 2025. Asterisk. The note was a smoking gun, clearly indicating Richard Avery knew something was wrong and actively participated in a cover-up. The reference to keeping the retainer active until 2025 suggested the initial structure had a planned shelf life or a contractual secret that needed to be maintained. Charlotte felt a profound sense of betrayal, heavier than anything Olivia had inflicted. She had fought tooth and nail to protect the sanctity of the Avery legacy, only to discover the man who created it had compromised its integrity from the start. She called Marcus immediately. The rot goes deeper than Olivia. It goes back to father. He was covering up financial misrepresentation related to the 2000 IPO and the creation of Avery Global Partners. Marcus arrived instantly, his face pale as he read the note. This is devastating. If the SEC finds this, they won't just fine us. They will demand a complete restatement of earnings going back 2 decades. The market will never recover. The brand will be destroyed. We have to contain this, Charlotte insisted. We can't let the SEC find this note or the supporting documents. We need to find out exactly what Elias Vance did and why father was so desperate to cover it up. But the SEC was already moving fast. Agent Davis and Agent Miller, now fully aware of the stakes, had issued a subpoena for all records related to Elias Vance and Avery Global Partners. Charlotte realized she had hours, maybe minutes, before the federal agents arrived to seize the original archives. Marcus, we need to find Elias Vance, Charlotte said, her mind racing. He's the only one who knows the truth of the AGP funding. If we can get him to talk, maybe we can figure out how to mitigate the damage before the SEC uses this to liquidate the entire company. He vanished years ago, Marcus reminded her. The retainer note suggests we were paying him to stay quiet, but we don't know where he is. We do know one thing, Charlotte said, pointing to the archive date on the Vance file. The retainer was set up to expire in 2025. That means the last payment was structured to go out soon. Let's trace the last payment of that retainer. It won't be in a corporate account. It will be routed through a blind trust. It took Marcus's financial expertise and a few tense hours of digging through old legal invoices, but they found the trail. The retainer payments, routed through an obscure trust in Liechtenstein, were deposited monthly into a personal account in a tiny coastal town in Maine. Elias Vance wasn't hiding in a fortress. He was living quietly on the coast, collecting hush money from a dead man's estate. Charlotte couldn't trust anyone else with this mission. She knew the moment she left New York, the SEC would be watching, but the stakes were too high. She had to save the legacy from the man who created it. She drove north through the night, the weight of her father's secret pressing down on her. She found Elias Vance in a small, weathered-clapboard house overlooking a cold, gray harbor. He was old, thin, and looked like a retired fisherman, not a master financial architect. Vance was startled to see her. Charlotte Avery? What are you doing here? I haven't spoken to anyone from Avery and Thorne in almost 20 years. My father, Richard Avery, Paid you to stay silent about Avery Global Partners, Charlotte stated, standing on his porch, holding a copy of her father's handwritten note. The SEC is investigating the initial funding of AGP. They are close to finding the truth. You need to tell me what you did, Elias. Vance sighed, running a hand over his face. He invited her inside, where the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and salt. Your father was brilliant, Charlotte, Vance began, settling into a worn armchair. But he was impatient. When he took the company public in 2000, Wall Street demanded growth targets he couldn't meet organically. He needed capital fast to fund the European expansion, but the banks were cautious. So what did you do? I created AGP in Luxembourg. We reported $150 million in capital investment, but the truth is, only $50 million was real cash, Vance confessed, his voice low. The other $100 million was inflated, a complex arrangement of cross-collateralized assets and structured debt that was legally dubious and designed to look like immediate, liquid investment to the SEC filings. He lied to the market, Charlotte breathed out, the realization sickening. He didn't lie. He optimized reporting, as he called it, Vance corrected, a grim smile touching his lips. He swore he would liquidate the debt and make the $100 million real within 5 years. But the company grew too fast, and he kept putting it off. By 2005, he realized the structure was too dangerous to ever audit. So he paid me to disappear and maintain silence until the statute of limitations was certain to run out, which he calculated would be 2025. And you kept the secret for 20 years, Charlotte said, feeling a surge of pity and disgust. It was a necessary evil to build the empire, Charlotte, Vance said, looking directly at her. Your father was building a legacy. He needed that initial boost. He was playing a different game. Charlotte understood the game. It was the same ruthless ambition that drove Olivia, only her father had been better at covering his tracks. The SEC is closing in, Elias. They have subpoenaed the AGP records. They will find the discrepancy. If they unravel the $100 million hole in the foundation, the entire company collapses. Then you have two choices, Charlotte, Vance said, leaning forward. You can allow the SEC to find the truth, expose your father's fraud, and watch the company dissolve, its assets sold off piece by piece. Or, you can find the $100 million and fill the hole. Charlotte scoffed. Where am I supposed to find $100 million? The corporate accounts are frozen, and Olivia's assets are tied up in legal injunctions. You don't need to find it from the company, Vance said, his eyes glinting. Richard Avery was a meticulous man. He knew he was playing a dangerous game. He wouldn't have left a $100 million liability without a parachute. He must have set aside a private reserve to cover the deficit if the structure ever collapsed. A private reserve? I never saw anything like that in the estate records. It wouldn't be in the estate, Charlotte. It would be hidden. A war chest. Your father would have called it the legacy fund. Something that only the last surviving, trusted person would know how to access. Charlotte felt a sudden, cold wave of intuition. Her father's will. It had been straightforward, splitting everything 50-50 between her and Olivia. But there was one clause, one small, confusing detail that had always bothered her. The will had stipulated that a single, antique key, kept in a safe deposit box known only to his lawyer, was to be given to the daughter who was currently running the couture and legacy division upon his death. At the time, she assumed it was a sentimental gesture, perhaps a key to an old archive cabinet or a lockbox containing personal mementos. She had the key now, stored deep in a drawer in her New York apartment, untouched for 5 years. The key, Charlotte whispered. He left me a key. Find out what that key unlocks, Charlotte, Vance urged. That might be your father's last, desperate attempt to protect the name. If you can fill that $100 million hole, you can prove to the SEC that the original capital was indeed present, just poorly accounted for. You can save Avery and Thorne. Charlotte raced back to New York. She burst into her apartment, retrieved the small, brass, antique key, and immediately called her father's old estate lawyer, Mr. Davidson. Mr. Davidson, I have the key that father left me, Charlotte said, her voice shaking with urgency. Where does it go? What does it open? Mr. Davidson, a man of extreme discretion, was cautious. Ms. Avery, Your father instructed me only to provide the location if you were facing a crisis that threatened the very existence of the Avery name. We are past crisis, Mr. Davidson. We are facing dissolution, Charlotte insisted, rapidly explaining the SEC's focus on Avery Global Partners and the $100 million deficit. Davidson was silent for a long moment. Very well. Your father entrusted me with the location of a private vault. It is not listed under the Avery name. It's in the oldest section of the Manhattan Trust Bank building, 3 blocks from Fifth Avenue. He called it the Thorn Vault. Only that key will open the interior compartment. Charlotte knew the bank. It was old, established, and known for handling the deepest secrets of New York's old money. The name, Thorn Vault, was another layer of misdirection, designed to throw off any suspicion from the Avery side of the family. Charlotte, accompanied by a highly nervous Marcus Thorne, arrived at the bank minutes later. The manager, recognizing the key and Mr. Davidson's authorization, led them through a maze of heavy, steel doors and down into the sub-basement. The vault was deep, cold, and quiet. They were led to a small, unmarked steel door. Charlotte inserted the antique key. It turned with a satisfying, heavy click. Inside, there was no gold, no jewelry, and no sentimental trinkets. There was only a single, heavy, leather-bound ledger and a simple, black USB drive. Charlotte pulled out the ledger. It wasn't an accounting book. It was a diary, handwritten by her father, Richard Avery, spanning the years 1998 to 2005. She flipped it open to the last entry, dated December 2005. Asterisk, if you are reading this, the AGP structure has been compromised. I built this company on a lie, and I won't let that lie destroy the lives of the thousands who depend on it. The $100 million is secured. It is not money, it is equity. I didn't have the cash in 2000, so I used the one thing I could truly leverage: the original, non-dilutable shares of the Thorne Family Trust. They were the key to the $100 million capital injection. The details are on the drive. This is the legacy fund. Use it to fill the hole and save the name. Asterisk. Charlotte looked up at Marcus Thorne, whose face was a mask of shock. The Thorne family shares, Charlotte whispered. Father didn't just lie to the SEC. He used the Thorne family's original, foundational equity, the shares that gave the Thorne family their initial power, as collateral for the inflated capital, without telling them. Marcus was reeling. My grandfather's shares? Those were meant to be untouchable. The original agreement stipulated they could never be leveraged or used as collateral. Father broke the agreement, Charlotte realized, her voice thick with emotion. He used the Thorne family's shares to create the illusion of $100 million in capital, ensuring the success of the IPO. He leveraged the entire Thorne legacy to save his own expansion. The betrayal was colossal, encompassing not just corporate fraud, but a deep, foundational deception against their oldest partners, Marcus's family. Charlotte plugged the USB drive into the secure laptop Marcus had brought. The drive contained a single, highly encrypted file. It took Marcus 10 agonizing minutes to break the code, which was simply the name of their mother. The file opened, revealing a single, complex legal document, a 2005 agreement detailing the repurchase structure for the leveraged Thorne shares. Richard Avery hadn't stolen the shares, but he had leveraged them in a way that violated the original partnership agreement. The document confirmed that the $100 million was indeed covered by these shares, but the shares themselves had been secretly funneled through a series of shell companies in the intervening years, designed to ensure they could never be traced back to the original leveraged debt. The SEC wouldn't see this as a cover-up. They would see it as a complex, ongoing financial crime orchestrated by Richard Avery, designed to mislead the market for 2 decades. If we reveal this, we fill the $100 million hole and save the company from the SEC, Charlotte said, looking at Marcus. But we destroy Father's reputation entirely, and we expose the Thorne family to a devastating legal battle over the validity of their current holdings. Marcus, the guardian of the Thorne legacy, closed his eyes, considering the gravity of the revelation. The SEC is going to find the AGP discrepancy anyway, Charlotte. If we don't act, they will dismantle the company. We have to sacrifice the reputation to save the brand. Charlotte nodded, a grim resolution settling over her. She had fought Olivia to save the legacy, only to realize the legacy was flawed from the start. Charlotte returned to the Avery and Thorne headquarters, the leather ledger and the USB drive locked in her secure briefcase. She knew what she had to do. She had to expose her father's actions to the SEC to save the company's future. She immediately called Diane Sterling and Marcus Thorne into a private meeting. "We have found the truth about the Avery Global Partners funding," Charlotte announced, laying the drive and the ledger on the table. "It proves that the $100 million capital deficit was covered by leveraged Thorne family shares. It means father committed fraud 20 years ago to build this company." Diane Sterling, the legal expert, was pragmatic. "This is a double-edged sword, Charlotte. It saves the company from dissolution by filling the hole, but it exposes the foundational fraud, which could trigger years of shareholder lawsuits. It's the only path to stability," Marcus insisted. "We present this to the SEC as full disclosure, showing that the current leadership, Charlotte, is dedicated to absolute transparency, even if it means exposing the founder." They spent the next 48 hours preparing a presentation for the SEC, detailing the AGP structure, the leverage of the Thorne shares, and the existence of the legacy fund. Charlotte felt a weight lift, but also a profound sense of loss. She was dismantling the myth of her father, brick by brick. The meeting with the SEC was tense. Agent Davis and Miller listened in silence as Charlotte, calm and professional, laid out the evidence of Richard Avery's 20-year-old deception. The $100 million deficit was covered by a complex equity swap, Charlotte concluded. "We have the documentation proving the capital was present, though improperly accounted for and concealed. We are prepared to immediately restate earnings and fully cooperate with any subsequent investigation into the historical records." Agent Davis looked at the ledger and the complex legal documents on the drive. "Ms. Avery, this is a stunning admission," Agent Davis said flatly. "This suggests the fraud at Avery and Thorne is not a recent event orchestrated by your sister, but a pattern of systemic corruption established by the founder himself. It suggests a crisis of conscience that led to a cover-up," Charlotte corrected, trying to salvage some dignity for her father. "But the current leadership is dedicated to correcting it." The SEC accepted the evidence, but their response was unexpected. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Avery," Agent Davis said. "This information is critical. However, in reviewing the legacy fund documents, we noticed something highly irregular." Agent Miller projected a section of the 2005 repurchase agreement onto the screen. It detailed the complex transfer of the leveraged Thorne shares through a series of shell corporations. The final shell corporation used to hold the repurchased equity, Agent Miller pointed out. It's called Avery Holdings Incorporated. It was established in Delaware in 2005. Charlotte frowned. Avery? That would be Olivia Avery. But she was only in her early 20s then. Why would father put a $100 million asset under her name? He didn't, Agent Davis corrected, looking pointedly at Charlotte. The O doesn't stand for Olivia. Agent Miller zoomed in on the notary seal and the initial incorporation paperwork for Avery Holdings Incorporated. The signature on the document, authorizing the creation of the shell corporation that held the $100 million in leveraged equity, the core foundation of the company's stability, was not Richard Avery's. It was the signature of Olivia Avery. But below that, in smaller print, was the name of the designated legal director of the holding company, the person authorized to make all decisions regarding the $100 million equity fund. It was Charlotte Avery. Charlotte stared at the screen, her blood turning to ice. Her father hadn't just created the fund. He had bound his two daughters to the secret decades ago. Olivia had signed the paperwork to create the shell company, and Charlotte was the legally designated director of that company, with the authority to manage the $100 million equity fund. The SEC didn't care about the founder anymore. They cared about the living directors. "Ms. Avery," Agent Davis said, her voice hard. "The documents clearly show that you have been the legal director of the company holding $100 million in leveraged, improperly reported equity since 2005. You have had the legal authority to resolve this financial discrepancy for the last 18 years. "I didn't know," Charlotte gasped, the betrayal reaching a new, impossible depth. "I never saw this document. I was in college in 2005. My father must have forged my signature, or had me sign something without realizing what it was. We will investigate the forgery claim, Agent Davis countered. But legally, Ms. Avery, you were the director of the shell corporation that held the fraudulent assets. And the moment you exposed your sister's recent fraud, you were also sitting on the largest, oldest financial irregularity in the company's history. Charlotte realized the full, terrifying scope of her father's final, desperate move. He hadn't just protected the company from the outside world. He had used his daughters as human shields, binding them to the deepest, most dangerous secret of the empire. Olivia had used the $20 million fraud to launch a hostile takeover. Charlotte had exposed that fraud to save the company. But now, the SEC had proof that Charlotte was legally responsible for the original, far larger, foundational fraud. The SEC was no longer interested in Olivia's recent crimes. They had found the bigger target, the systemic failure of governance and decades of financial malfeasance, all pointing back to the two sisters who had inherited the burden. We are issuing a formal notice of investigation into Charlotte Avery as director of O. Avery Holdings Incorporated for conspiracy to commit financial fraud and misrepresentation of assets, Agent Davis stated, her expression devoid of emotion. The SEC is now seeking a formal, court-ordered injunction to seize and dismantle Avery and Thorne in its entirety, arguing the company is fundamentally insolvent and built on decades of fraud. Charlotte had won the fight against her sister, but she had handed the SEC the weapon they needed to destroy the entire family brand. The final, devastating chapter of Avery and Thorne was about to begin. The room felt like an execution chamber. The mahogany table, once a symbol of power, now looked like a slab for corporate sacrifice. Charlotte sat across from Diane Sterling and Marcus Thorne, the air thick with the realization of their collective doom. The SEC's position is clear, Charlotte, Diane stated, her voice tight. The $100 million is the ultimate smoking gun. They don't just see a fraudulent transaction. They see a 20-year pattern of deception built into the company's capital structure. They are arguing that Avery and Thorne is built on a lie, and therefore, every dollar of current valuation is fraudulent. They will petition the court for a full, forced liquidation. Liquidation. That meant selling off the assets, the showrooms, the archives, the intellectual property, the name, in pieces to satisfy creditors and the government. Avery and Thorne would cease to exist. Father's final move was a trap, Charlotte realized, the bitterness sharp in her mouth. He didn't just protect the company. He ensured that whoever held the key, whoever ran the legacy division, was legally bound to the cover-up. And Olivia, by being the signatory on the shell company, was equally implicated. He forced us into a shared, inescapable liability. Exactly, Marcus confirmed, looking utterly defeated. Richard Avery didn't trust either of you to run the company, but he trusted both of you to be too loyal to the name to let the secret out. He made sure that if the SEC ever got close, the blame would fall on the surviving leaders, you and Olivia. The irony was brutal. Charlotte had fought Olivia's theft of $20 million, only to uncover a $100 million bomb planted by their father. We have one desperate play, Diane said, leaning forward. The legacy fund. The $100 million in leveraged Thorne equity. We can use it to recapitalize the company, effectively proving to the SEC that the original capital hole is filled. We clean the slate. But that equity is still tied up in O. Avery Holdings Incorporated, Charlotte pointed out. And I am the director, yes, but Olivia is the signatory of the incorporation. We need both our full cooperation, or at least her full surrender, to legally transfer that asset without further investigation. Olivia, isolated and besieged by federal charges, was the only person who could legally block the move that would save the company. Charlotte knew she couldn't appeal to Olivia's sisterly feelings. Those were long dead. She had to appeal to the one thing Olivia feared more than anything else: prison and absolute ruin. I need to make her an offer she can't refuse, Charlotte decided, standing up. I need to trade the company for her freedom. Charlotte instructed Diane to contact Mr. Harrington, Olivia's defense attorney, with a final, non-negotiable ultimatum. Tell Mr. Harrington this. I will drop the civil lawsuit for $5 billion in damages, and I will issue a public statement that my sister has agreed to fully cooperate with the SEC by providing all necessary signatures to stabilize the company, Charlotte dictated. In return, Olivia must immediately surrender all her remaining Avery and Thorn shares, the full 51.5%, and sign the legal documentation required to transfer the legacy fund equity to the company's new, clean capital structure. She walks away with her personal, non-Avery assets intact, and I promise to use the company's resources to ensure her legal defense is focused solely on mitigating her federal charges. It was the ultimate sacrifice. Charlotte was offering to save Olivia's personal wealth and legal future in exchange for Olivia giving up the corporate power she had murdered their relationship to acquire. The negotiation was brutal, lasting 24 hours. Mr. Harrington fought for every concession, but Diane was unyielding. Olivia was facing decades in federal prison. $5 billion in damages was a secondary concern, but a powerful bargaining chip. Finally, just hours before the SEC's court-ordered liquidation injunction was set to be finalized, the facts arrived. It was a thick stack of documents, bearing Olivia's frantic, scrawled signature on the share transfer agreement and the legal instruments necessary to dissolve Avery Holdings Incorporated and inject the $100 million equity into the company. Olivia had capitulated. She had lost the company, but she had saved herself from total financial and legal annihilation. The final emergency board meeting was held not in the grand conference room, but in Marcus Thorne's smaller, more secure office. The three independent directors and Marcus were present. Charlotte, now the sole remaining co-CEO, stood before them. We have secured the $100 million equity necessary to stabilize the company's capital structure, Charlotte announced, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. This eliminates the SEC's primary claim that the company is insolvent due to foundational fraud. She looked at Marcus. The Thorne family, in an act of extraordinary good faith, has agreed to sacrifice their claim to the leveraged shares, allowing us to permanently clean the slate. Marcus nodded, a look of profound resignation on his face. He had saved the brand, but sacrificed his family's historical claim to control. However, Charlotte continued, holding up the thick stack of transfer documents, the SEC investigation has proven that the Avery name itself is toxic. The founder committed fraud, one co-CEO committed gross embezzlement, and the other co-CEO was legally implicated in the original cover-up. We cannot move forward under the Avery name without subjecting the company to years of legal battles, shareholder distrust, and market volatility. She laid out the final plan, a radical, painful surgery. I propose that the board immediately vote to accept Olivia Avery's full surrender of all her shares. Then, using the newly stabilized capital structure, we will launch an immediate, internal management buyout, selling the entire operating entity of Avery and Thorne to a newly formed holding corporation. Who would own the new corporation? Asked Mr. Sterling, one of the independent directors. The new corporation will be owned by the independent directors and Marcus Thorne, structured to eliminate all historical ties to the Avery family's controlling interest, Charlotte stated. I will use my remaining shares to fund the final, massive severance and restructuring costs, ensuring every employee is protected and that the brand can survive its transition. She paused, taking a deep breath. This means that for Avery and Thorne to survive, the Avery family must completely relinquish control. We must sacrifice the name to save the craft. It was the ultimate paradox. The fight to protect the legacy had resulted in the permanent removal of the family from the legacy. The vote was unanimous. The board agreed to the surgical sale. Charlotte had won the war against her sister, and she had won the war against the SEC's liquidation order, but the cost was the final, total surrender of the Avery dynasty. The press conference 2 days later was the end of an era. The announcement was spun as a bold, necessary restructuring led by the independent board members, designed to cleanse the legacy and ensure ethical governance. Avery and Thorne, the global fashion house, was renamed Thorne & Company. Marcus Thorne was confirmed as the new CEO. The headquarters were reorganized, and the toxic ready-to-wear division was permanently shuttered. Charlotte stood beside Marcus, calm and resolute, as she delivered her final statement. I have dedicated my life to the artistry and integrity of this brand, Charlotte said, her voice carrying the weight of the truth. Today, I step away from my corporate role, having fulfilled my promise to stabilize the company and ensure its survival. I believe that under the new leadership, the soul of the brand, the dedication to craft, beauty, and timeless design will endure. She didn't mention Olivia. She didn't mention her father's fraud. She spoke only of the future. She had traded her family's name for the survival of the artistry. When she walked out of the headquarters for the final time, she wasn't escorted by marshals or lawyers. She was alone, carrying nothing but her handbag and the antique key, the key to a legacy she no longer believed in. 6 months later, the dust had settled. Olivia Avery was facing a protracted legal battle. Mitch Harris had flipped and was testifying against her, hoping to reduce his own sentence. The SEC was relentless, and while Olivia's wealth protected her from poverty, it couldn't protect her from the slow, grinding machinery of federal prosecution. She was confined to her penthouse, utterly alone, stripped of the power and status that had defined her. She had won 51.5% of a company she ultimately couldn't keep. Charlotte, her name publicly cleared, had walked away with a significant, though diminished, personal fortune. She had refused any further involvement with Thorne and Company, choosing instead to reclaim the one thing she truly cared about: creation. She used a portion of her remaining money to buy a small, quiet studio in upstate New York, far from the polished glass towers of Manhattan. She wasn't building an empire. She was building beautiful things. She started a tiny, bespoke atelier focused entirely on haute couture, creating pieces that prioritized artistry and tradition above profit and market share. She called the new venture simply the Legacy Studio. The Avery name was gone from the global market, replaced by the clean, stable Thorne and Company. The brand survived, smaller, wiser, and ethically structured, thanks to the sacrifice Charlotte and Marcus had made. One rainy afternoon, Charlotte was sketching a new design, a complex embroidery pattern that required months of handiwork. She received a small, unmarked package delivered by a courier. Inside was a single item, the antique, brass key that had opened the Thorne vault. There was no note. Charlotte knew it was from Marcus. He was letting her know that the secret was safe, the company was stable, and the burden of the legacy was officially lifted. Charlotte walked over to her fireplace and tossed the heavy brass key into the flames. It wasn't a symbol of a legacy anymore. It was a symbol of a lie. She watched the brass darken in the heat until it was unrecognizable. She returned to her desk, picked up her pencil, and looked down at the fabric she was working with, a bolt of pure, unblemished silk. The multi-billion-dollar empire was gone. The sister she trusted was ruined. The father she revered was revealed as a fraud. But Charlotte was finally free. She had paid the ultimate price to save the only thing that ever truly mattered, the integrity of the craft itself. And in the quiet solitude of her studio, she began to build something new, something real, knowing that sometimes the only way to truly save a legacy is to let the name die. The story of the Avery sisters, folks? It wasn't a story about winning a billion-dollar brand. It was a story about learning that the biggest fortunes often carry the deepest, darkest secrets, and that sometimes the most successful business move you can ever make is knowing when to walk away. And that, my friends, is the cold, hard truth of old money and new ambition.